Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. So in the intro montage of this episode, I went ahead and I pulled the intake manifold off of the SC. And you may be asking yourself, well, why? You had an intake manifold on it that would probably have worked perfectly fine, so what's your plan moving forward? And fear not, I have a good plan and one that I think you guys will be pretty interested in. So the old intake manifold is right here. And yes, it is an intake manifold. Yes, it would have worked. But in trying to make this car nicer, this is just not going to suffice. There are plenty of visible bandsaw marks on the throttle body flange. It uses a factory fuel rail, factory everything else. On the inside of it, I'm not sure if you guys can see or not. Let's give this a shot. Maybe. But there's some ugliness going on the inside of it. And overall, I can just build a much nicer intake manifold now. And that is where the other things on the table come in. So right here, we have another set of 2JZ GE non-air assist lower intake manifold runners. And right here, I have the cheapest intake manifold plenum that I could find on good old Amazon. So this plenum, I believe it was like $77 or something along those lines. The picture on the screen right now will tell for sure. But this is a knockoff of a Ross Machine Racing intake manifold. And what I'm going to do is make a nicer version of this out of all of this stuff. And ideally, by the end of this video, I'll have made the cheapest intake manifold that I'll at least have ever made. Or I will at least have ever made. And it should work out perfectly fine. So, I'm actually rather surprised at how nice this plenum is. You can see on the inside of it that it is a true extruded piece of aluminum rather than being a cast piece. And this combined with this should equate to a nice new intake manifold for this car. So for the sake of transparency, I've already tested this prior to right now, but I'll do it on camera so that way we can see exactly what's going on. So I have my lower runners fastened to the cylinder head, and now as I try to fit the plenum in place, you can see that it doesn't really fit with the brake line fittings right here, and even if it did, it would be super close. So what I'm going to do is actually take some of the length out of these runners, sinking the plenum a little bit closer in towards the cylinder head, and allowing myself a bit more clearance to make this a little bit easier to install and remove with how I have all of the brake lines ran. As well as that, it doesn't really clear the booster all that well, but using longer factory runners with a big plenum, you kind of get what you get, and it isn't the end of the world. So I guess now I need to figure out how much I'm going to cut out of these runners, how far I'm going to sink it back, and I have to be a bit cognizant of that distance, as I will still have a fuel rail that needs to clear the side of the plenum as well. Well, I think we have most of the modifications done to the actual lower runners themselves. I still have to do a little bit of cleanup work, but that is not a big deal. And most importantly, the plenum clears everything that it needs to clear in the engine bay from what I can tell right now. Now, I will have to do some pretty in-depth modification to the plenum itself, as the way that it was designed for the section that I cut off of the runners to still be in place. And if I put these pieces, let's see, if I do it side by side like this, you can see that the port spacing between the plenum and the runners is completely off at this point in time. So what I'll need to do is to come in and actually cut this floor plate off of the plenum. And that will allow me to craft a new floor plate that fits the actual ports of the runners. And I have a pretty trick idea of how to incorporate some velocity stack type transitions into this floor plate without actually having to buy velocity stacks. Well, the SC's intake runners and new plenum floor plate are all squared away. Or almost all squared away, I should say. Now, I meant to make more progress on these yesterday, but the port job that I did took way longer than anticipated, which is just kind of the way it goes when you're doing port work. So, these I didn't take a whole lot of material out. It was mainly just smoothing, but everything is pretty smooth, or it's at least better than it was. And as you can see, the runners are also welded to the new floor plate. And next up is the portion that I'm really excited about and really excited to try out. So I was watching videos on making intake manifolds a little while ago, and I stumbled across, I believe it's a guy in England that used this method that I'm about to with excellent results. So you can see on the floor plate that we have kind of witness outlines for each one of the runners. And I also have a hole saw that pretty well matches up to the inside of each of these ports. And what I'm going to do is initially hole saw these holes out and then come in with this guy. And what this is a 1/4-inch round over bit for a router. And I'm going to take this 1/4-inch bit, run it around, and this little bearing on the tip of the bit will, as you can see right here, maybe, the bearing rides along the side of the piece, and the farther that you sink this bit down, the more pronounced and the wider that radius is going to be. So why this matters is I'm going to take this roundover bit, run it around each one of these ports, and effectively create a velocity stack for each of the 6 intake ports without having to buy billet velocity stacks or anything along those lines. So hopefully this works out the way that I think it's going to. I have my 2JZ GE intake manifold fixture plate clamped down to the edge sander, and I can go ahead and start making a mess. So let's go ahead and get to it and see if this works out the same way practically that it does theoretically. Well, after more porting and cleanup work and everything else than I care to admit, this is the end result of the new floor plate. So I came in and blended everything kind of as seamlessly as I could, and everything is radiused going into each one of these ports, making it essentially a velocity stack setup without really that much money involved, just a bit of time. So at this point in time, I'm ready to take this lower section over to the welding room and get everything zapped together, get the plenum applied to this, and then it's just a matter of fitting the throttle body flange and some reference bunks from there. This intake manifold is really starting to take shape. So here is what we're left with after the, I guess, second welding session. The plenum is now welded to the floor plate. Like I showed earlier, all of the port work and everything is done on the inside of it. I also went ahead and welded over the factory weld right here, just so all of the welds on this plenum are mine at this point. And now I just wait for my throttle body to come in. So the throttle body, it may be a clearance issue to the power steering fitting right here, but there are plenty of low profile power steering fittings available, or I can always modify the fitting that is on the car currently. I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to do. I'll wait until the throttle body comes in and make a decision at that point in time. The other thing I'll need to knock out or take into account are reference bungs. And I need a bung for the fuel pressure regulator, for the map sensor, and the blow-off valve and wastegate. So I'll have to put at least 4 bungs in, and I also need to put one in for the brake booster. So that I may just put a fitting on the top side of the manifold like so. Not exactly sure yet, but I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. Right now I'm just happy that the manifold is to the point that it is currently. Well, the SC's new throttle body has arrived, and here is what I chose. This is a Ross Machine Racing 82.5mm throttle body that I got really lucky where this throttle body actually works with the flange that I cut off of the SC's new plenum. Well, I did that because I suspected I would have to make a new throttle body flange, but it turns out that is not the case. This bolts right up to it, places the throttle body in a nice advantageous location, and all that I need to do now is to clean up that throttle body flange. Now when I cut it off, I cut the weld off with it, so there is a bit of hangover that is still present on this flange. So with my good friend Mr. Flap Wheel right here, I will sand all of that down, and that will also expose the bolt holes that are currently covered up with these welds. So that way I can end up putting time certs in there so I'm not threading directly into aluminum, as aluminum threads have a tendency to fatigue and strip out over time. So let me go ahead, I'll get that flange all sanded down, then we can figure out its orientation and location on the plenum, get that marked out, welded on, and then we are just a few reference bungs and I guess those time certs away from this being a done deal. few days of work in the books, and the SC is now the proud owner of a brand new intake manifold. So like I said earlier in the video, this is by far the cheapest 2JZ intake manifold that I've ever built, and it's probably one of the cheapest that has ever been put together. So the manifold itself, excluding the throttle body, I had right around, it was somewhere between 150 and 175 US dollars invested into this. Now the way I was able to do that is by using a bunch of excess materials I had sitting around and ordering as few parts as I possibly could. So the runners, those are ones that I had sitting around. The new plenum floor plate, that's some extra 3/16 aluminum sheet metal I had sitting around. The plenum itself came off of Amazon for right around $80, and I was able to use the plenum and the throttle body flange. I had to order in the reference bungs that you see along the outside of the plenum right here, as well as the brake booster bung right there. But all in, like I said, we'll go on the high side and say $175 to get a brand new performance intake manifold for this thing. With the throttle body included, we were in kind of the 4 to 425 range, but even still, if you look up the prices of 2JZ GE intake manifolds, even the cheap ones on Amazon, you're still looking probably $1,000 or $1,100 for a package deal, as opposed to my, call it $400 for this. So it may not be an apples to apples comparison, as it took, obviously, the money aside, it took all of the skills that I've developed over the time that I've been doing this work to make all of this happen. To weld everything together, to port everything, to fit everything, so on and so forth. And that you can't really put a price tag on. But hopefully this serves as maybe some incentive or some inspiration to you guys that you can take fairly cheap things and what would end up being scrap metal and turn them into something functional and cool, and with a little bit of effort you can build your own parts just like this. So now that the intake manifold is completed, or more or less completed, there's still a few things I need to do to it. I need to put the time certs in the throttle body flange so I can actually fasten the throttle body on for good. And I'm debating if I want to put an idle air control valve on it as well. I have the idle air control valve on the Mark IV, but I really didn't feel like pulling it off of the car right now and having to make a block-off plate and everything else. So I'll let that idea bounce around my head for a little while, and if I decide to put one on the car, then it'll get the 2JZ twin-turbo one that's on the Mark IV, and that will make its way over onto this intake manifold. But with all that being said, I think that will be about the end of this episode. So thank you guys, as always, for coming along on all these different adventures and journeys with me. In this one, this SC300 Resurrection and Rebirth is one that I've been excited about for a long time. So we have one of the bigger projects completed now with the intake manifold, and the next one upcoming will be beginning on the new header. So over here in this box, and underneath of this piece of paper, we have all of the bends that will be involved with this new header build. And I already pulled all the straight tubing out in preparation for a collector cutting day. That won't be now, that'll be in the next episode. So if you'd like to come along and see how to build merge collectors and how a header goes together, that will be a good starting point for you. But with all that being said, I think that will be the end of this episode. So as always, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, check out the website for manifolds, for merch, for all things good that way. And be sure to check out my 15th anniversary commemorative t-shirts and hoodies, available in the link in the description below. And with that being said, I will see you guys in the next episode.